from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
We are very pleased to welcome you back to our series entitled Journey Through Time, Visits to 5 Historical Cities. For you who were with us last week, you know that this is a rather long-running series that we're doing, and we're most thankful to all those at North Idaho College who have made this possible through our lecture series called the North Idaho College Popcorn Forum. I would like to particularly thank the Idaho Humanities Council, the North Idaho College Foundation, and the associated students at North Idaho College for very generous funding, allowing us to do the lecture series and also these wonderful TV programs. On today's particular program, our topic is Journey Through Time, Conversations with Famous Residents and Visitors to Peking or Beijing, China. We're looking at different times in history, although our greatest emphasis has been the period from about 600 to 450 BC. On the program today, we have 3 guests who, in history, left their mark. I would say these were very aggressive individuals and certainly not those that we would call supporters of democracy, but we want to talk about what their role was in society. And I first of all welcome to the program these 3 guests. Portraying those individuals, I would like to first welcome to the program Donna Runge, who is a counselor at North Idaho College, and she's been good over the years to play individuals for us. And today she is here to portray Su Hashi, who is a Chinese empress who lived from 1835 until 1908, and I believe your reign was from 1862 to 1908. Welcome to our program, and we're going to go back in time when you lived and talk about what you did. Our second guest is going to be portrayed by Del Marcy, who is a member of the faculty at North Idaho College in the Natural Sciences, and he is here today to portray Genghis Khan, who was a Mongol conqueror and lived from 1162 until 1227. Welcome to our program, and we want to pursue your life and your causes on our program of Journey Through Time. And our third guest today is Karen Streeter, who is the registrar at North Idaho College, and she, like the other 2 guests, all 3 of them, in fact, have been in these roles of playing people in past years, and we are grateful to them. And Karen is here today to portray Zhang Xing, who was also known as Mrs. Mao Zedong, who was a Chinese political revolutionary and lived from 1913 to 1991. And welcome to the program. In all 3 cases, you have been at least recorded in Western history and literature as individuals who were domineering and either through yourself or others that you worked with applied what we would call very strict and rigid rules. And I think I shall start over here and ask our first guest that I introduced to tell us a little about your life, what you did do, and how you reigned. In fact, it has often been charged that you were maybe the most aggressive and negative empress of the history. And would you please share with us remarks or comments to that comment?
Okay. I did reign after I became a concubine. I became a concubine at the age of 14 and produced a son for the emperor, his only son, and that is what gave me power. And behind the walls, I was not permitted as I was not permitted to see certain people. And after I had my child, I became more powerful and actually became an empress. And my son only lived for 19 years. And I did adopt my nephew when he was very small to come to be in power. It is definitely stated that I was very ruthless, that I beheaded many missionaries' children, that I drowned people, and that I used people. I definitely felt like I had the courage because I had a lot of masculine influence. My the emperor only lived for 12 years, and after his death I became a regent, so I had much more power in the country. And there were a lot of accusations about me, and some of them were correct and some of them may not be correct, because in the 1900s a lot of the records were lost, and so accurate records of my life may not be accurate, because they did mix me up with another concubine that had a name very similar to mine also.
So do I hear you indicating that you will indicate that some of the facts that we have heard are true about that you were a strong-willed person and in your ruling and decision-making, but you also deny some of the descriptions?
Yes. I was very energetic, and I was never a complacent person, so I liked being very busy and very active politically, and also was very interested in our culture, and also had ministers. And the question is whether I was actually the instigator of a lot of things or the victim of my ministers.
I'll be coming back to you, and there's been some great leaders from China and great influence like Confucius, much earlier than your time, the influence of Buddha, and Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who could not be with us today, but also made great changes. And you might be thinking about how you would react to their writings and thoughts and ideas that were in many ways a contrast to yours. We shall return. I would like to move on to Genghis Khan, and you too have been charged with being at times very ruthless, a conqueror who was very successful. Would you share some about your life, and would you like to respond to those charges, or explain why that you were the kind of ruler that you were? What was your purpose? What were your causes that you were pursuing from your expansion that you engaged in during your rule?
I was born to a poor Mongol tribe on the steppes north of the Chinese empires. My father was poisoned when I was 6 years old, and so I had no power. So I lived my life struggling to attain power. My enemies say that I am a barbarian, but I behaved in a manner acceptable in my society. Mongol men performed two functions. One is they hunted, and two is they conducted war. It's a very harsh life on the steppes in Mongolia. Resources were scarce, so there's a lot of conflict between the tribes. I was elected by my followers as Genghis Khan, the emperor of the world. I was elected because I'm a very good warrior. Many soldiers were good warriors, but I was a very good leader. I knew when to attack neighboring camps so that we could steal horses, steal supplies, and I always divided my supplies equally among my followers based on their rank, and I promoted my soldiers based on their skill. So I had very loyal followers, and I was a very good strategy developer. So I knew when to attack and how to attack and be very successful. I was a very good horseman. I expected my soldiers to be very good horsemen, and we had rules that I set that no one retreated at the penalty of death, and no one abandoned another soldier at the penalty of death. So my soldiers would fight valiantly for me. I made significant changes in my culture. When I was young, my tribe ate dogs and mice and wore the skins of dogs and mice. After I became Genghis Khan, my society is filled with riches. They have more horses than they can count, more goats than we know what to do with. It's a very bountiful time.
So your concentration was very much with your men, your soldiers. your concern was their survival, their expansion, their prosperity, as I hear you talking. Although you had very, very rigid military rules and discipline within that, you're indicating that was part of the reason for the success of your military adventures, was because of the great discipline and the training that you did?
Certainly. My empire was based on the Army. The power was based on the Army. I reorganized the Army so that any man could rise in ranks depending upon his skill. And I reorganized the society the same way. Feuds between families and between tribes would disrupt the stability of our society. So I reorganized the families and assigned them based on a system of tens, so that a family would not be aligned against other families in old blood feuds. And this way I could control the society and the instability of individual feuds.
Did you ever have concern that for those who were outside of your structure in your army and the destruction that took place? Or did you have any cause other than, one, your desire for your soldiers and all to survive, but also was there greed involved? Was there hunger for power? Because the history is recorded that you were very aggressive toward those that you pursued.
I was ordained by heavens to be the Genghis Khan. How else could a man with my humble beginning rise to the emperor of the world?
So you justified it on those grounds?
Certainly.
If you don't mind me, I call you Mrs. Mao Zedong because you're better known under those terms in the Western world in 1998. And if I may do that.
You may.
May I ask you something about, obviously, your life? And we know a little bit more about your life because it's more recent. Obviously, you only passed away in 1991. Tell us something about your life and obviously your life with Mao Zedong and how it has changed China. And we'll come back to some questions about Confucianism, but with the incorporation of Marxism and communism under your husband's rule, and after he died, your continued political activity. So again, I have the same two-part question, something about yourself and your causes and your beliefs.
Well, my name is actually Zhang Jing, so although I don't mind Mrs. Mao Zedong. Mao and I were married in 1937. At that time, I was an actress. And for the next 20 years, I spent much of my time simply managing the household and being a companion to Mao. I was able to hold a couple of minor governmental posts, but my involvement was minimal. Certainly not my choice, but the party, when it approved my marriage to Mao, it was on condition that I refrained from any political activity for at least 30 years. And so it remained until the 1960s when I became involved in the Cultural Revolution. And there I actually, it was a low point for Mao. Some of his powers, because of some previous setbacks, were not where they should be. And there were actually some moderates in the government of whom he certainly did not approve.
They often have reformers, revisionists, and you and he both had problems with those?
Yes, we certainly did. We could see that they were on their road down to capitalism, which, certainly is not China and certainly is not how things should be. Mao believed that if capitalism came to China, that a new elite group would form, and he felt that it was really the proletariat or the workers who should take power for themselves. He was completely believed the communist ideology, and it was his feeling that economic growth would come if China maintained the correct revolutionary fervor. And of course, that was what we were doing in the Cultural Revolution, was to help maintain that fervor and hopefully bring about the changes that were needed.
So you and your husband Mao believed in collective ownership as the Marxist doctrine believed, and you saw coming in through the revisionist as you said, introduction of some ownership in private enterprise, and that disturbs you very much?
It would not. It was, we had to protect the worker, and only by doing the collective farms and things like that, and changing the focus from the city to the rural, were we able to do that, to protect that man.
In the Western media, you have been charged of being more rigid and inflexible, and one might say even ruthless than Mao, that in his later life there was some suggestion that he had moderated some, or that certainly Zhou Enlai, who was his ally, that they were not as subjectable to some changes, and they'd sent some signals toward the West, which later Vice Premier Deng Xiaoping would certainly support as change. And if we look at 1998, there's some real changes coming.
Certainly.
How would you respond to the fact that you were thought to be maybe even more militant than he, after his death in particular?
I only did those things that Mao asked me to do. Those things that you hear are not true. When I was arrested, they had all of these charges that they brought against me and this trumped up evidence, but I maintain that I did nothing wrong. And certainly there were some errors made as they tried to moderate, and we could not accept that Western influence. But I did nothing, and that I should not have. I followed the party line, and I followed Mao's line. And
even though you were part of the Gang of Four and you were tried, you never ever compromised. You stuck right to your position to the end. Is that right?
well, of course.
Okay. Back to across the table, I mentioned I want all three of you to deal with this. Certainly, as I said earlier in the program, there is tremendous influence from Confucius. And I would say to Mrs. Mao Zedong in particular that there was a real struggle, many people feel, between the really well-established Confucius doctrine ideas that goes back for thousands of years in China, and that some say that communism, Marxism, was a betrayal of that, or had to accommodate Confucianism, and certainly the power of the religion of Buddha. And so may I go back to Su Hishi and ask you, how would you respond to, certainly those philosophies and religions have been much more powerful than your reign, and did you have any agreement with it? Did you accommodate in any way, or how do you explain the benevolence and the cooperation in that compared with some of the charges that have been made against you in history?
I was a devout Buddhist, so followed all the practices of Buddhism, and I don't feel like I strayed from that, no matter what people say that I did.
But you admitted on the program that there was some charges that you were ruthless. That would certainly not be part of the dogma or tenets of Buddhism, would it?
Actually, what happened was in 1898, the last emperor that I came out of retirement and put him in confinement, he had all sorts of charges against me, and I feel like some of the practices that he stated that I did were untrue. I did not have a chance to refute those because of the fact that I died in 1908.
What would you consider your contribution to society that you're most proud of?
I feel I was a great empress. I cared about China. I was very in tune to what was happening in our country at that particular time. I made a few mistakes, like maybe not developing the army the way I needed to. When we decided to help Korea when the Japanese attacked, we were not prepared because I had not felt that it was necessary to build our army. But I did feel like I always had the people their best interest, and I did what I needed to do.
Did you think China was stronger because of you or weaker?
Stronger.
Genghis Khan, we'll come back to you again, and somewhat the same question, although you're living in a very different period. But now, if we look at it after all of these centuries in 1998, and you are familiar with the Buddhist doctrine and also Confucianism, how would you react to those beliefs compared with what you did?
I believe differently than the Buddhists or the Confucius. I never attacked another society's religion that would get into a religious war. Instead, I would accommodate their religions. If they said that I was a barbarian, and I would tell them, yes, I might be, and I'm following what your religion will say, that there is going to be a time of turmoil, and I'm the time of turmoil. I believe that spirits walk among us. I have a shaman that I listen to. A Taoist is one of my consultants. I always consulted the oracle before I conducted a battle. I several times put off wars because the omens were not right. So I believe my own belief. I would never attack another religion. It didn't suit my purpose.
But some of the things you did, would they not be in violation of some of the tenets of either the philosophies or religion? We have a great debate in history about Confucianism. Is it a philosophy, is it a religion, or is it both? Of course, Buddhism is a religion. How could you deal with that if you were in a setting and you were controlling, and yet what you were doing would be in disagreement, and those who followed the philosophy or religion separate from you, would you be able to allow them to advocate that without threatening your power?
Certainly not. Inside my empire, I ruled with rules that I had written down, and those rules benefited a nomad's lifestyle. And so if the sedentary lifestyle that was supported by Confucius and Buddha, it wasn't the nomad's lifestyle. So it would be at conflict with us, and what was against us was destroyed.
So there was a limit to your tolerance.
Certainly.
Mrs. Mao Zedong, in modern political discussions, there's been tremendous discussion, as I said earlier, about the long established Confucius writings and doctrines and beliefs. And from what I do know about that, which is limited, but also then the study of Marxism, they're not the same. How did you and Mao both try to incorporate Marxism and communism when it did not adhere to what the people of China believe so deeply about Confucianism? How did you walk that tight line? How did you manage that during your lifetime?
Well, during the Cultural Revolution, there was a group known as the Red Guard. It was young soldiers, students, young people who were much enamored with the mysticism of Mao. And they came to accept his philosophy. And part of the philosophy was to eliminate these things that were old. We sometimes, now, although we did not ask them to do it, the Red Guard would go ahead and ransack some of the homes of the scholars, and they would destroy the old papers and letters and things like that. Sometimes they were known to ransack and burn the temples and those kinds of things. We really hoped that people would come to see things from the communist point of view, and by changing some of the destroying some of the temples and things like that, people would come around a little bit. I was engaged in a theater reform as an actress. That was certainly one of my fortes. And I forced the directors to change the main characters to the workers who were inspired by Mao's teachings.
So you want to influence the arts and the humanities, every aspect of life.
Oh,
everything
we most
was
certainly
public.
did. Yeah.
You've been thought of, Mao in particular, as turning the Red Guards loose across the country, the youth, to stop this movement of the revisionists, and also, of course, that could also affect some of the belief system of Confucianism, and at least temporarily that was very powerful and so forth. We're almost out of time. We don't have much time left. I want to get one comment from you, and I'll go back to Genghis Khan, but tell us a little bit about the trial and what happened to you in the end. You were defiant to the end.
Yes, at communist trials, the accused is considered to be guilty, and normally a confession is expected, but they got no confession from me. I still maintain I did nothing wrong, although they did find me guilty on all counts and sentenced me to death. But when I heard the sentence, I called out to them, "It is no crime to make revolution," but I was ready to die. They suspended my death sentence for 2 years just to see how I might behave. Well, I did not change my stance, but in 1983 they commuted my sentence to life imprisonment. And in 1987 I was set free and was able to return to private life. I was never able to return to politics, which was my first love. But I still do not understand why they arrested me.
You died in 1991, and how?
There was not much to live for, and I committed suicide.
We have a little over a minute left, Genghis Khan, and what do you think was your most important contribution, or what were you most proud of in this aggressive life you led?
I opened up the trade lines across Asia, allowed traders to move, and that was probably the greatest accomplishment, was the mobility of our society and the way that the culture of our society was spread because of my rule.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion. To all three of you, thank you for being in our program called Journey Through Time. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join us again next week when we will continue this journey through time and visit yet another city. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Instructional Technology on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.